All right, welcome back to the Baseball America Prospect Podcast. Your host this week, standing in for JJ Cooper, is Geoff Pontes. Of course, I'm typically his co-host, but this week we're bringing back our co-host, or tri-host from last week, Mark Chiarelli. Mark, what's going on, man? How are you? I'm glad to have you here on the show. Filling in for my guy JJ. Get some business he had to take care of. He's a busy man.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. This is a fun time of year. We're in call-up season. I know that if you're a subscriber to baseballamerica.com, I'll do the shameless plug early. You've seen a lot the last week or two in terms of data-driven takeaways from the season. We're starting to transition our coverage into what we've learned throughout the scope of the year and starting to look ahead to the offseason, prospect handbook season, top 10 season. We'll be here before we know it. So fun time at BA. I'm excited to dive into some guys today with you.
Yeah, it's actually like a fun time of the year at BA because we get to kind of, like, as you said, wrap up so much stuff that we've watched throughout the year. But I also think, like, we watch trends early. We watch trends that are kind of happen in the middle of the season and then obviously late. But now it's great to kind of take that step back. You really have a large sample size to work with. Everything for the data is pretty much standardized across the board. So you can really trust a lot of the numbers that you're seeing, that there are actual like sea change, sort of skill improvements, et cetera, with certain prospects. And it's always fun to write about those guys. The other thing is, this is like one of the few times during the year where we're not updating top 30s. Like we updated them leading up to the season, obviously all the handbook stuff that happens. It's like this and January are pretty much the only times that we're even January, because we actually add the international guys now. So it's like, this is kind of like the one period I can watch some baseball games. I can watch some MLB games, follow what's going on. And that leads us into the biggest news of the day. We've had a lot of prospect call-ups. We're going to be talking September call-ups all throughout this show in a variety of ways, styles, and fashions. But the biggest one, I think, for me, already happened on August 26th. Jonah Tong, right-handed pitcher of the New York Mets. I think the front runner at this point for minor league pitcher of the year. He might have just about locked it up with a couple weeks left in the season now. He's going to make his MLB debut against the Marlins at Citi Field on Friday. I'm excited for this one, Mark, because obviously this is one of my favorite prospects. I'll let you maybe, talk a little bit about him, ask me some questions, because I'm going to wax poetic for at least a few minutes on Tong.
Yes, let me set you up to go deeper on Jonah Tong. 172 strikeouts this season. He's 32 clear of anyone else in the minor leagues. I think, and I've been thinking a lot about what you write or talk about frequently with pitchers, in that they can change their stripes so quickly. And I think Tong is like the perfect example of both how fun it is and also the challenge of evaluating pitching prospects, because he was a fairly nondescript high school 7th rounder in 2022. Even at the beginning of last season, his fastball was low 90s. He was an interesting guy, but he wasn't a top 30 guy. You fast forward about 18 months, he's added like 3 miles an hour on his fastball. He's suddenly number 42 on our top 100. And there were hundreds of Mets fans who told us over the weekend that perhaps that's even a little too low on the top 100. And you might have a point. But it's just been such a rapid rise. And now you're dropping maybe the most exciting pitching prospect in the minors throughout the course of the season, smack dab into a playoff race. I'd say to you, as you step back and think about the reporting you've done on Tong throughout the course of the year, what is it that stands out to you the most? And what do you think about this moment in time now? What was it that the Mets looked at and said, all right, he's ready. Like, this is the right time to drop him into this situation?
Yeah, I'll answer the last part first. I think the reason that they think that he's ready is the performance that we've seen in AAA. It hasn't lagged behind at all. And that's a really tough environment to pitch in. I think when we talk about Andrew Painter later on the show, we'll get into a little bit of that. You're dealing with a challenge system. This late in the season, you're dealing with guys, opposing hitters that really, really know that auto zone that exists. It's not a full auto zone, but the challenge system, they know it really well. They know where they can challenge, where they can't. They even know from park to park what type of zone they're going to have, because they aren't always consistent in terms of top and bottom of zone, at least from what I've heard from pitchers as well as hitters that have dealt with the system. So I think that's a big part of it. I think the other part of it is, this is an all systems go sort of front office. Even with Stearns there, we know with Cohen, who's really pulling the strings and obviously dropping a ton of money into this team. They go and they sign Juan Soto, they go and they acquire other players and pieces at the deadline. I think it's just all systems go. And there's no reason to hold these guys back. I fully support it. I think with hitting prospects, there's often things and hurdles you need to get over. I think with pitching prospects, especially when they're this good and they're performing at this level, and there's no questions about 40-man stuff or really losing multiple years of control. That's really not an issue here. I think the big thing is you're looking at a rotation that really needs a turbo booster. Nolan McLean was the first, NOS tank, nitrous oxide, or whatever you want to say, like the first nitrous that they put in that engine. Tong's the second one. And I even think if we want to talk about another one, Brandon Sproat could be an interesting player, even if he's used situationally. He's not on McLean. He's not on Tong's level. But I think when you look at that, the Mets are looking at this right now, and it's like there's no reason not to get these guys up here now, get them experience, because these are pitchers who could start playoff games for us, in a short series. And I think that speaks to how good they are. It also speaks to the amount of injuries, the lack of depth, and the lack of really established starting pitchers in that Mets rotation. Because you do look at a guy like Clay Holmes, who had an excellent first half of the season. He's starting to wear down a little bit now. I mean, this is a guy that was, a relief pitcher his entire career and has made the jump to the starting rotation. So I think they need these reinforcements. I think they've managed them correctly. When it comes to the actual player, I think it's so unique because, as you said, it's something I always say that like pitching prospects aren't ever sort of like a finished product from year to year. And I even think when they first come up to the big leagues, because there's going to be some adjustment, something that he needs to tweak, work around, be cognizant of, pitch to, whatever it might be. There's always something that these guys struggle with. It's a much bigger sort of learning curve. I do think that in comparison to previous years, over the last couple years, we've seen more immediate success with a lot of these guys that are coming from AAA, because they are having to deal with an even tighter strike zone than the one they're going to get in the big leagues. And JJ has done some great research that kind of backs that and bears that out. Now, you look at the arsenal. This is a guy that even when he didn't have the big velocity, had a ton of ride in his fastball, has a ton of deception from a really dynamic, high effort delivery. I think, when you're trying to find a comparison out there historically, Lincecum is a really good one. I talked with Jonah Tong a few times this year, had maybe about 25, 30 minutes with him at the prospect pad as we finally got to meet in person after interviewed 3 or 4 times over the years. So we had a good conversation. He kind of just talked about Lincecum's my guy. Like, that's kind of who I modeled, my operation after, and, I've kind of leaned into that. And I think when we look at Lincecum, smaller guy, generated a lot of velocity and a lot of movement from a smaller frame, and you really used every sort of inch of, his, physical frame to actually get to consistent power. So, I don't know how long this lasts. There's definitely some injury risk here with Tong, but that said, the fastball keeps getting better. It's added that velocity this year. He started to add some throughout the season last year. It's made another jump into the mid 90s, the high 90s at times. It's 20 inches of induced vertical break from a very unusual slot. Like, yes, it's over the top, and that kind of allows you to cheat in terms of getting that ride on the fastball, getting behind it. But if you watch his delivery, he hides the ball really well and really extends very well and springs forward, and it sort of tilts his shoulder and it kind of catapults the ball over the top. So I think that fastball is going to play regardless of the type of hitters. It's going to be about location with him. The thing that's different year over year is there are scouts that I talked to that were like, I had a 55-60 on the slider last year. Now I have more of a 45-50. He's traded some of that slider for the changeup, which I think right now is playing like a 60, maybe a 70. It's a hard 6. Like, it's in that upper echelon of 6s before, we start to talk about plus. The results have been plus throughout the season. He uses it to, either handed batter too, which is unusual for an off-speed pitch. Typically you're using that with off-handed batters. He almost uses it like a breaking ball, and it's really effective. I think calling him a 2-pitch pitcher, though, is maybe incorrect because we have seen a plus breaking ball from this guy before. The curveball is still a very usable pitch, but I think like with a lot of curveballs, it's a little bit slower. It's a downer curveball. It's more of an early strike, early count strikes stealer, or, something you're going to use late in count to keep guys sort of off balance because they're sitting on, off speed or fastball. So I think the slider development for me is something that we could really see take a jump next year. The guy that's coming up now is going to try to dominate with fastball, changeup. I wouldn't be shocked if we see a little bit more breaking ball usage than we saw in AAA. But overall, this is the most exciting pitcher, I think, to watch among pitching prospects. Even Bubba Chandler, who's super exciting, right? We have all these interesting guys, but I think you see the smaller, sort of nondescript, average-looking guy with a very low-key kind of personality, and then, gets on the mound, has these funky mechanics. It's super explosive. It's athletic, and the stuff is unbelievable. And he looks like, he could be your enterprise rental guy. He's just so mild-mannered.
For a lot of those reasons, I think that's why I was a lot slower to warm up to Tong this year. Like, you've been on Tong all year. From this, I think it was middle of May. You wrote the story about how he changed his changeup even before the breakout picks. Like, you've been on him. I was a little bit slower to warm up, probably because of there's just so much unusual going on at once with him. But the thing that really stuck out to me, and also I walk away a little bit more bullish that he can actually be a difference maker in the rotation as opposed to maybe someone out of the bullpen. His first 11 starts this year, strike percentage, 61%. His next 11 starts, it's at 65. Like, the strike throwing is getting better. He's in the zone more. It has not come with a degradation of performance. His first 2 starts in AAA this year were maybe 2 of the more electric starts you're going to see at the level this season. Like you said, that includes Bubba. It includes Chase Burns. Jacob Misiorowski had an unbelievable run. In Tong, this year is right with those guys. So the last question, I guess, last point I'm going to leave you on with Tong. You drop him into this mix. They're going to start him. You mentioned the rotation, like Holmes and Senga are kind of outperforming their peripherals. Who is their number 1 starter in a playoff series right now? Is it David Peterson? Like, is it crazy? Check me on how much or how realistic, what you should be expecting from Nolan McLean and Jonah Tong down the stretch. Like, these seem like key cogs all of a sudden for what the Mets want to accomplish this year.
It wouldn't shock. Way McLean has pitched so far, and we have to see what happens with Tong. Like, I don't want to necessarily throw it out there. This guy's going to be their ace in the playoffs. Right now, I think I would start Nolan McLean game 1. I feel like if I was in a playoff series, I would want to pitch that guy as much as I possibly could. Especially if I had designs of, making it NLCS and, potentially returning to the World Series for the first time in quite a while. So I think it would probably be Senga more often. That would probably be my guess. But I think if you're looking at 2 and 3, if it's Peterson, it's got to be McLean. And then, we'll see if Tong pitches his way back, into this conversation and makes it a really fun, good problem to have, difficult decision type of scenario. So, I think it could be very interesting to see how that all goes. All right, that's enough Mets talk for now. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go through a bunch of different contenders and call out at least one player that we think could make a difference in September call-ups.
FT fam, welcome to the world's most comfortable swimwear. For a moment, we are talking about Fair Harbor. We actually have some show and tell today. This is the liner that you're working with inside of the shorts and the bathing suits.
You know what the best part is about this, Scott?
What?
They have a lot of different options because these are clearly yours because I would never order this pattern, but
that is so
great
me.
On you.
That is so me.
These are so you. Mine are a little bit more plain than this.
Yes.
But they are super comfortable. The liner, I love liner shorts. Some people don't. But these liners are better than most that I've had on, if not all of them.
Yeah, this is the best liner out there.
No mesh. All of the above is perfect.
Exactly. It's really good. You got to give it a shot. Also, fun random fact, you get a new shirt. It smells really good. So head to fairharborclothing.com/foul and use code FOUL for 20% off your first purchase. Once again, fairharbor, HARBOR clothing.com/FOUL for 20% off your first purchase and use that promo code FOUL so they know FT sent you.
We'll be right back. All right, and we are back. Geoff Pontes, Mark Chiarelli. We are talking September call-ups. We're going to go through a couple of teams. We've already talked about the Mets. We've already kind of covered their rotation, all the arms that could potentially come up. I don't think there's anybody else to talk about there. I want to talk about the Red Sox in particular, because I feel like there's a guy in AAA who has been performing not as well as Tong, came up a little bit before him, but has performed pretty well outside of one inning that I was present for where dang Mikey Ramiro botched an inning-ending double play, and then the next batter hit a home run. So that was not a great one for him. But Payton Tolle, of course, is who I'm talking about. I mean, you're in the Boston market just like me. We're both Massachusetts guys. So, we sort of pick up the questions, the clamoring from other Red Sox fans, the things that we hear on TV, the radio, whatever media we might be exposed to here. He's a guy that's got some buzz right now. And I think, especially when you look at sort of what the shortcomings are of this team, they're always looking for more pitching, and they're looking for more pitching that could potentially be a difference maker. I do think that Tolle in a variety of roles could be valuable for them. But I don't know if they pull the trigger on it this quick, especially when you consider, he's pushing up on kind of his all-time, innings limit or max, just based on what he did in college. He was, of course, a two-way guy, so there is some wear and tear that he hasn't had this year that he might have had then. But what are your thoughts here? Because like I said, this is a player that's coming up quite a bit in conversations just in and around Red Sox fans.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, his max in college was 85 2/3 innings, and that was 2 years ago, 2023 at Wichita State. But I actually think that Boston has done a decent job managing the workload throughout the season. I think he's at 91 2/3 going into today. When you step back and just look at the composition of this pitching staff right now, in some ways, I think it would be a disservice to not think about Tolle really hard at this point. If the Red Sox were to walk into a playoff series today, their number one starter, obviously Garrett Crochet, and that's where it kind of stops in terms of what I would say you feel comfortable with in a playoff series. I think Lucas Giolito, Brian Bayo, or some combination of 2 and 3 among pitchers with at least 100 innings this year. Giolito's 19.5% strikeout percentage, 65th. Bayo's is even worse. He's at 18.2%. That's 80th. The Red Sox starting pitchers don't miss a lot of bats. That's what sent Walker Buehler to the bullpen. That's why Dustin May is not in Los Angeles anymore, and I don't think you can count on him. There is a real need for another starter. I think, to your point on Tolle, the fastball is so exceptional. Like the extension and the qualities of that one particular pitch, to me, makes him a really interesting multi-inning guy. I would kind of flip it back to you as far as how the rest of the arsenal comes together, where your confidence level is right now that he could turn over a lineup once in September, or could be a guy that they could lean on in a playoff series.
Yeah, he's a guy with a deep arsenal. I think, the fastball, for good reason, gets most of the headlines. It's probably the best starting pitcher fastball in the minors this year. And I'll even include like Chase Burns and Bubba Chandler in that mix. Just the traits, the velocity coming from the left side. He's, a top of the scale, 80 extension, and his ability to create plane with a bigger body. It's really easy cheese too. Like there's not a lot of effort to it because he's built like a left tackle. He's just a mountain of a guy, but really athletic and moves really well. And that's why I kind of, call it to an athletic left tackle, because I think it's sort of like, you see their footwork and you're like, how is this guy doing that? It's kind of the same thing. It's really, really easy. The arsenal's deep too. He's got a 2-plane curveball. He's got more of a sweeper slider. He's got a harder cutter as well. He'll mix in a gyro slider. When I was looking at the data from the last couple of starts, and there's maybe some debate about this, and I'd have to ask him, I think he's actually throwing 2 different changeups. I think he's throwing a splitter, and he's also throwing a kick changeup. I know for 100% fact he's throwing a kick changeup, but there were a couple of these pitches that were marked as splitters that were like, single digits on vert and arm side run, where there were some kick changeups that were like 12, 13, 14 inches of arm side runs, so like a different movement profile. That's really interesting. So his ability to pick up pitches is obviously there because this arsenal is much deeper than what it was when he was at TCU or Wichita State. Now we're looking at, multiple different breaking ball shapes, the ability to kind of manipulate it and throw different styles of sliders almost, as well as having like this curveball, and everything is kind of within that 80 to like 90 mile per hour range. So he kind of has different secondaries for like different bands of velocity. So he has those natural bridge pitches and he can attack in a variety of different ways. And he's left-handed, which is going to give him some of the, the split benefits as well. If he's seeing lefty heavy lineups, it's really, really hard to hit him. So I think the secondaries are probably mostly 50s right now. I think I would probably go 55 or maybe even 60 on the changeup. Just, the swing and miss of it, the ability to play off of that arm slot and really sell it. But also it looks like he might actually have multiple shapes. So he's a really interesting player. I think the other thing is when you look at, Richard Fitz going down, Hunter Dobbins hurt. They have all these guys that, were sort of rotation depth for them down the stretch that made it possible to really not even consider calling up Tolle for a lot of reasons, right? Just 40-man roster, all that sort of stuff. David Sandlin probably would have been the first guy I would have anticipated might have gotten the call. But that was more for a bullpen role. They tried it out in Worcester. It's been pretty bad out of the bullpen, so I don't think he's going to end up getting the call. And then it comes down to the two lefties. I think it's either Tolle or Conley Early. I think the thing with Tolle is it's just such outlier stuff. There's so little question that it could play out of the bullpen, or as like a 4 or 5 inning starter if they want to sort of limit the innings or have him behind an opener or something like that. It can work in a variety of ways, and they kind of need it. So it's one of those things. I don't know if they'll give up the years of control, just the way that the Red Sox typically manage the roster. They don't get super aggressive with that sort of stuff. That said, they have, they're coming off a big series in New York. They have an opportunity down the stretch here to maybe win the division if they play really well, but lock up a wild card spot, play some playoff games in Fenway Park. And it's been a really long time, it feels like, since they've done that. So, I don't see a reason not to call them up outside of sort of managing either innings or, the roster management piece of it. I don't know if there's, other 40-man roster decisions that would put them into a different crunch, but I think it's all systems go right now, and this guy can help you.
Yeah, I think if there's one global takeaway from all the players we talk about today, I'm going to err on the side of you should go for it. It's just such a disservice to your fan base if you feel like you're in a position to and you hold back. I think that, I know this is a prospect podcast, but that's really been the conversation in Boston all year, even from how they handled Roman Anthony, Marcelo Meyer, and the way he came up. I think you could second guess how that was handled. They trade Rafael Devers with the idea that it opens up some flexibility and don't really cash in on that at the deadline. Like, there have been opportunities this year for the Red Sox to push the proverbial chips closer to all in and haven't done it. I think that calling on Tolle, and I agree with you, to me, it's probably safer to do it as a bulk inning guy as opposed to saying, hey, you're firmly in our rotation. But this is my kind of all in, hey, we feel good about where you're at. I don't see a ton of downside here, just based on what you described and how the fastball plays.
Unfortunately, it will probably be Kyle Harrison, who's pitching tonight. So not to let all you guys down, but that's probably what will happen. That said, let's get everyone all hyped up again. Let's talk about some Tigers prospects. Let's talk about Kevin McGonigle. Let's talk a little about Max Clark. I know they want to keep these guys together. I think at this point, if I'm the Tigers and I'm like, hey, there's one of these guys that can make a difference right now, it's not Max Clark. And that's not an insult. Max Clark is a great prospect, top 10 type of prospect. I think going to be a future star, multi-time All-Star, all that stuff. It's Kevin McGonigle. I don't know if there's a prospect offensively that I've been this sort of in on, that I didn't have a lot of questions about, that hadn't debuted yet, or was close to debuting. Because I think I maybe felt very, very comfortable with Gunnar or a Corbin Carroll and some of these other guys we've had up top, Jackson Churio, but not like this. Like, because there's not a lot of nits to pick. When I broke him down last week in the first data article, when I was looking at 10, outstanding hitters and breaking out their data, he was number one, and it wasn't particularly close. He just does everything well. He hits the ball harder than you think. He hits the ball at good angles, makes contact, doesn't chase out of the zone, walks at a great deal, is going to hit for average. He's going to hit for power. He can run. And I think the other part of it is he's already got like a big league approach to the game. Does everything really, really hard. This is not a guy that's going to loaf it to first base ever. He's always going to put the pressure on the defense, almost to the point that you might feel like he's a little bit of a hardo at times. But like, I think it's a good thing. Like, he kind of has like that sort of, and we always go with the body comps, right? Because he's a short guy, so you say Dustin Pedroia. But it's like, truly, I think like when you look at like gritty guys, it's like Pedroia, Bregman, guys that just give their all every time and expect the same of their teammates. And that McGonigle has some of those traits, which makes me even more comfortable that he could make the jump from AA to the big leagues, be successful, and really kind of change the dynamic of that lineup, because I think he lengthens it, and I think he gives them, especially if it's as good as I think it will be, gives them kind of a dynamo at the top, where it's a guy that can produce a ton of runs for you, can take that extra base. If you got runners on, he's not going to be selfish, just trying to pull the ball in the air. He'll hit a ball the other way and just get the ball in play. He'll do all those little things that, a veteran big leaguer would do. And it's why I really want to see the Tigers call up Kevin McGonigle, but I'm not holding my breath for it, Mark.
Well, you and JJ covered it across various platforms already. The at-bats last week against Harlan Susana was incredible theater. It's like the scores, it is so good. The thing that I keep coming back to, and I spent a lot of time yesterday watching McGonigle because I'm gearing up for the McGonigle versus Connor Griffin, who should be number one offseason debate. I have Griffin in the Pirates for BA in the handbook. The level of polish with the at-bats, even relative to what you watch with Griffin, and I know Griffin has an incredible supplemental tool set, but the level of polish with McGonigle is incredible. And I think if you dropped him into a big league setting right now, you absolutely would get at least competitive at-bats. You would get the kind of at-bats that you want to see grinding it out in big games. What I struggled more with, I'd love to get your take on, is what you do with him defensively in this situation, because I think that there's a lot less consensus that he's a shortstop. You can find some scouts. We have found some scouts this year who do think he can stick there. We found others who think that the arm's a little light, the range is a little light. He's definitely better suited at second base. I don't see him moving Gleyber Torres off. The Tigers have interesting questions. You have Zach McKinstry right now at shortstop. Javier Baez is in center field. It's the defensive positioning, roster construction. Like, it's not a perfect fit. So where do you net out on the defense and how that might factor into this calculus?
Yeah. And I think it's, maybe a little bit easier when you're talking about a lefty, because Kerry Carpenter probably isn't going to be your DH those days. Colt Keith's not going to play. McGonigle has hit lefties pretty well. So I think that he could maybe fit in that role pretty easily. Now, when it comes to sort of defensive stuff, he's definitely one of their best four infielders, right? And I think that's sort of the thing, is you look at a player like Colt Keith at third base. He's not a very good defender, right? He's a negative defender there at third base, and that's a position that actually has some esteem defensively. So he will gain some actual WAR points just for playing the position. Well, according to Fangraphs, he's negative 6.3 WAR at third base. I think McGonigle can be a better third baseman right now than what Colt Keith is. Is he their best defensive shortstop? No. I think there's maybe a case that could be made. He's their best defensive second baseman, but he's played primarily on the left side of the infield. So I think keeping him over there, maybe playing him a little bit out of position at third base. You know, you can have some questions with the arm, that it's not the biggest arm out there, but he's got enough of an arm, and his internal clock and his release is really quick. And what we've seen from Dansby Swanson and a lot of these guys is, regardless of how much sort of oomph or power you have in the arm, if you have that quick release, if you have that good internal clock, you can still make all the throws that are needed from the shortstop position or from the third base position. So I think I would probably play him at third base, and then you try to figure out where you hit Colt Keith, who has had a good season defensively. I mean, offensively, but he's only about 13% better than the average big leaguer. So I think you're going to get a bump there overall. Now, maybe Keith slides into, that's the tough part of it, right? Because you got Torque. He's not going to play second. You're not going to have him DH against righties because you have Kerry Carpenter doing that. And he's, one of the better power hitters against right-handed pitching in the game. So it kind of makes Colt Keith, I think, a little bit of the odd man out because they've already played a few infielders out of position here. I mean, they got Wenceal Perez, who, what came up as an infielder, as their right fielder. They got Javi Baez in center field. And then you have, of course, like Riley Green in left, you're not doing anything with. So it is a bit of an interesting problem. I think maybe the easiest solution and the best thing for the lineup was to have him replace Zach McKinstry, and McKinstry then becomes sort of your utility guy, and you can play him at third some days. Play him at second some days and rest some of these guys down the stretch, and then see how it sort of works out. And it can also be an excellent late inning replacement at like 7 different positions. So, I think there is a case to be made that maybe the best fit is still at shortstop. Even if he's not their best defensive shortstop, the overall impact will outweigh any sort of lack of plays there. He's still pretty good though. I still think he could be an average shortstop. But, they have 3 different guys on that team already that can play short. A lot of shortstops on that team, actually.
It's a really weird roster. So I have one point and one additional question for you on the Tigers. And I suppose we probably should have prefaced with the caveat that obviously neither of these guys has even reached AAA yet. We understand that this would be a very aggressive decision. That said, I don't think you can script up a better September call-up situation to be aggressive than what the Tigers have right now. They're 10.5 games up in this. They're going to win their division. You have a longer runway of September of finding the right mix and match. As far as teams playing for World Series go, it is low stress. I mean, we talked about Jonah Tong is getting dropped into an absolute inferno in New York, especially if the Mets continue to kind of struggle. Payton Tolle might need to become a rotation piece for a team that doesn't have enough pitching and is trying to stay alive in the wild card. These 2 Tigers prospects don't face those same kind of immediate pressures. As you were talking through the lineup construction, and as I was trying to think through what the easiest path would be, one that I kept coming back to was you have Javi Baez in center field, and he has graded out this year a little bit better in center than he has as a shortstop. But it seems relatively clean compared to maybe the musical chairs of infielders to say, could you put Javi Baez back at shortstop and run Max Clark out at center field? And you from the top you seem to think that Clark maybe isn't ready. When I looked at some of the stuff under the hood, they have fairly identical zone whiff. The miss rates are pretty similar. The chase rates are pretty similar. The exit velos are pretty similar. McGonigle gets his hard hit balls in the air more frequently. Clark, hits it into the ground a lot. Clark also swings a lot less. So I know that there's probably some skepticism there.
Well,
but I
think
also
the other metric I'll throw at you with that one that I think is the big difference sort of between the 2 when we look at the approach is they don't chase, but McGonigle has an 80% heart swing rate. So, and Clark's is 67.5%. So there's a pretty substantial difference there in terms of taking pitches down the middle of the plate McGonigle just doesn't take many of those, if ever. Like 80 is like an outstanding heart swing with sort of the swing decisions that he has. So Clark's a little bit more passive. I think he's going to like here. Clark could come up and absolutely probably plays a better defensive center field than Javi Baez does now. Probably produces more at the plate than Baez. Certainly makes pitchers work a lot more than Baez does. Right? Just from having the lower swing rate, he's kind of the antithesis of Javi Baez at the plate. But they still got a lot of money tied into Baez that I don't know if that his performance has been bad enough that they're willing to sort of bite the bullet on that one. But after kind of like a first half resurgence, he has kind of come a little down to earth. So that's possible. What if we put Zach McKinstry in center field and we have Kevin McGonigle at shortstop?
Good. That's a good counter. I'm trying to think that in, there's obviously a human element to this. You're dropping two guys into a very difficult situation. I think from what we've read, we've reported on, they seem like two types of players that would kind of thrive in a pressure situation. Like, and that's where I kept coming back to Clark. Like, I know it's a big ask, but I don't think he would be afraid of this situation. And I think that the way that he plays, there's some speed, there's some defense. I don't think it's going to happen, but it has my attention. I think of all these guys we talk about today, these two, it's like the most fun button. If you press that button, Tigers full send in on this. So we'll leave a little bit of hope, but yeah, obviously I do think it's pretty unlikely.
And I think we both have memories of Xander Bogaerts coming up late in the season and, helping a World Series run before he had even graduated from prospect status, if you recall, right?
Well, you don't have to look too far back. I mean, Evan Carter and McGonigle in terms of minor league playing time are not all that different, and
or Clark.
Carter was maybe a little bit safer defensive fit at the time, but I think there are some similarities there in situation as well.
Yeah. And Carter isn't a great defender. So, I think that's totally reasonable. It won't happen, but it would be really fun. All right, let's move on to the next one. We can spend a little less time on this one. Let's talk about Blue Jays. Kind of it's the opposite of last year, where it felt like everything that could possibly go wrong for this organization went wrong. Alek Manoah further out, seems as if his career was lost. Bo Bichette has a down year. There's injuries up and down the lineup. They trade away Gabriel Moreno. Moreno is one of the best catchers in baseball. It's like everything that they did for a year seemed to blow up in their face. They obviously had the missed pursuit of Shohei Ohtani, and many of these big name free agents have a similar kind of offseason. They head into it this year. They signed the extension with Vlad. And it's a lot of the same returning players. They've been one of the best teams in baseball. They're the second best team in the American League. They're one game, actually a half game behind the Tigers for the best record in the American League at this moment in time. And the second best record in all of baseball, just behind the Brewers. So I think you look at the season and it's been a massive bounce back for an organization that I think a lot of people probably counted out coming into the season in a really difficult AL East that had teams like the Orioles, who had, in recent years, won 100 games, won the division, made the playoffs. The Yankees, who were the defending AL champion. The Rays, who were always sneaky. And then a really improved Red Sox team that, but if we went back and looked, there were a lot of people who picked the Blue Jays to finish last in this division. That's not happening. They're going to make the playoffs. And, I think that they have one player that we want to see get called up. And he's a guy who has been in AAA. He's had some experience now in AAA. They've moved him really, really quickly. It wouldn't be shocking if Trey Yesavage was used in some way, shape, or form down the stretch here in September, even if it's just as like a multi-inning bullpen guy, get him some experience, have another valuable arm in that bullpen, which still is looking for some reinforcements. The rotation's pretty deep right now, though. I will say that. You got Berrios, you got Gausman, Scherzer, Bassett, Eric Lauer, who has been really, really good for the Blue Jays this year. And then, of course, their prized deadline acquisition, which was Shane Bieber, who looked outstanding in his first start. arguably as good as Bieber has ever looked. And this is a guy that in a Mickey Mouse season, but did win a Cy Young award. So, I don't know if there's a spot for him necessarily. But it is a nice problem to have. And I think especially with some of these older veterans, guys like Gausman, Scherzer, Bassett, even Bieber, there's a lot of innings on those arms. And being able to skip or start or two in September because you have those additional players on your roster, I think it could be really valuable. And, I think this team is all in. They will take this risk. They will take the chance of losing some years in free agency to get Yesavage to the show, especially if they feel that this is, one of, their best 12 or 13 arms that they have.
Yeah, the Blue Jays rotation depth as it relates to Yesavage and joining the pitching staff at some point for me is a feature, not a bug, because this is another one of those really good situations where you don't have to ask more from someone than you want to at this point in the season. I think, and I wanted to team up relative to Jonah Tong, who we opened with, a 22-year-old righty with a unusual slot. Well, Yesavage, 22-year-old righty with an even more unusual arm slot. Like I think we have a weekly series on the site, Statcast Standouts, that Ellie Ben Parat writes, and he pointed out this week that everything Yesavage throws breaks to his arm side. He doesn't have anything that goes glove side. It's in unbelievably vertical slot. Like it almost looks like, the pictures of basketball players when their like arm is cocked and they're ready to poster someone, they're super vertical coming down at the rim. Like that's him coming down the mound every time at you. It's just so strange, but it works. And he's 41.9% strikeout rate this year in the minors. Like he has missed a ton of bats at every level. The command has been a little shakier, I would say, in the upper minors, but I'd love to hear your take on how you compare and contrast those two guys at this point in their respective seasons.
Tong is just more dynamic. He's more deceptive than I think Yesavage is. The command is better. And I don't necessarily just mean the strike throwing. I think it's actually like where he throws into the zone. The other thing I think with Yesavage is, especially in particular, the splitter is very much a chase pitch, more so than even most off speeds are, which I think is a little bit different. Like Tong can land that thing in the zone and get swings and misses in the zone. Tong, gets more extension. Yesavage is kind of a short strider. So from that sort of perspective of like the deception, the perceived velocity, all those sort of things that factor into how stuff plays, Tong is just a tick up. Yesavage has more of a traditional starter's build. He's a bigger guy, more of a workhorse look, that sort of thing. That said, there were a lot of teams, not the Blue Jays, but there were a lot of teams that after that pick was made had kind of brought up some things to me when I'm doing my reporting after the draft and following up on players that are in my organizations. There were some questions on the medicals. So, it's not like it's all the way gone, and Tong hasn't really had any, major medical issues in the last few years. Yesavage has had a couple, some of them not his own fault, of course. But yeah, and I think he is a big game guy. Like we saw him against ECU, against Wake Forest, in a college tournament game, and he outpitched Chase Burns against a better lineup. I mean, I'm not saying anything crazy here that the Wake Forest lineup that had Nick Kurtz in it.
Hey, we
in 2024.
East Carolina, we respect East Carolina on this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Cliff. I'm not trying to sideswipe your guys here, but I'm just saying Wake had a MLB All-Star caliber hitter, and this guy was shoving. So, he has been in those situations in those moments, but they're similar in the fact that their funky arm actions are over the top. How they get to that is very different. Where like Yesavage's arm almost moves like a catapult. Like you said, it's like it comes back and just like rockets forward, and he kind of has like this plunk in the back, this plunge, and then it just comes right over the top. So it's a very unusual look. I think that some hitters will pick up the fastball a little bit better than they do Tong, just because of, how deep Tong kind of gets into his glutes and his back, push off foot and then extends forward. The ball kind of all gets hidden there in that arm stroke and then sort of flies over, and he kind of tilts a little bit to get that, where you're a little bit less tilt, a little bit more natural on Yesavage. So different. And the other thing is, Tong does have a few pitches that kind of move. Like his slider does move to the glove side somewhat, So yeah, it is really unusual. And it's one of those things I noticed when looking at the TrackMan in Florida State League, that like this guy sometimes will go glove side a little bit with like his cut slider type of deal, but more often than not, it moves arm side, which is just very unusual. So, but weird is good, and weird can play. So we'll see. I think he'd be better off in like a 2 to 3 inning kind of situation. I think he would get, at this point with the command, probably get hit pretty hard second time through the order.
Yeah. I mean, I would say JJ loves to say this, right? Teams will tell you how they feel about guys, and they seem to be moving him with the idea that he could handle this, right? Like he's touched every level this year. I know he started in Dunedin, but he's up to AAA now. They seem to be prepping him for that kind of role at this point. I think the multi-inning or even just 1 inning out of the bullpen, he seems like a great weird like counter option to what hitters are used to seeing. The last point I would make on him, it's a kudos to the Blue Jays. I know you've been beating this drum all year. This system, a lot of guys moving in the right direction. I mean, where they got him in the draft, and I know there's medicals and everyone is far from a finished product, but if you look at his year this year, where they got him in the draft, and then you compare it to, say, Hagen Smith, who went 5th overall to the White Sox, like, more time will pass, but a year in, it looks like a really good pick, especially if he can impact September or impact the postseason. That's a slam dunk.
Totally agree. All right, let's move on to our next team here. We've talked Jays, we've talked Mets at the top of the show, we've talked Red Sox, we've talked a little Tigers. I want to talk a little bit about the Phillies. I want to talk a little bit about Andrew Painter. I know you did as well. So I'm going to kick it over to you first, because I know you kind of had some questions, some things. I saw Painter very recently. I'm in the more pro Painter camp, having had some experience recently and then just, over the years as well. And I think you're a little more skeptical. So let's sort of hear your skepticism, Mark.
Yeah, well, we've talked about kind of the right time. Like Jonah Tong has dominated all year. The Tigers situation is a relatively low stakes September compared to some other teams fighting for a World Series. Like when you think about striking when the iron is hot, I don't necessarily know that that's where Andrew Painter is right now. I think since July 1st, he's got a 5.87 ERA. It's a 62% strike percentage, 20 walks in 46 innings. But he also stands out to me as one of the most obvious potential September call-ups because of where he's ranked and his pedigree. He's the 3rd best pitcher on our top 100. Number 1 is Mizurowski. Number 2 is Chase Burns. Right behind him is Bubba Chandler, who just got the call. And then you have Thomas White, who I think is 21st in the top 100. So based on pedigree, it's an obvious question to ask. And Zach Wheeler is now out for the season. You would think that there's a need for someone to fill some innings, even if it's in, again, more of a multi-inning role as opposed to a rotation. I just haven't felt like the performance necessarily is engenders a ton of optimism at this stage in the year, but perhaps you feel differently.
Yeah, and I do. I saw Painter in Worcester on the 30th of July, so right before the trade deadline. He was phenomenal that day. He didn't strike out the house, nothing like that. But he just commanded both sides of the plate really well. The breaking stuff looked like it was easy plus. I was sitting next to a scout that day that had said to me, like, I got to be honest, like, I think I'd put like 360s and maybe like a 55 on this with like advanced command. And so you get those days. And we have, it's funny, over the last month, seen 3 of those starts. His best start was by far the one that I saw in Worcester, but I've seen Painter previous to the injury. I saw him in his first start in the AFL after the injury. seen Painter four or five times. His last two starts have been good. Had a start against Buffalo where he went 5. He struck out 5, allowed 2 earned runs on 4 hits, 3 walks. Last game, 5 innings, 1 earned run, 4 hits, 4 walks, 5 strikeouts. The big issue with Painter has been the home runs. And I wonder how much of that is the AAA environment, him not getting some of those edge strikes high. I think the other part of it is, and this is kind of the scary part with Painter, or sort of the downside, his fastball gets absolutely obliterated. It constantly gets hit, but his fastball has always gotten hit. When I saw him in Double A before the injury, his fastball got hit pretty hard. He gave up some hard contact in that first start. I think he gave up a home run to Jose Briseño, and then Josue Briseño, and another guy maybe hit a hard double off of him. But I think some of that is the deception, like what I talked about with Tong, where like he hides the ball really well. I don't know that Painter always hides the ball that well. When it's at a certain velocity, it really plays because he has this sort of combination of velo in the upper 90s and like 19 to 20 inches of induced vertical break and some cut. When he's throwing those fastballs, it doesn't get hit that hard. When it ticks down a little bit in terms of velocity and it's more mid 90s, or it's more like 17 inches of ride, and it's maybe not cutting as much as it does on the ones that he really gets like 19, 20 at like 97, 98 on 99. I've seen him hit 100. Those fastballs always play. When they kind of drop down a little bit, I think it leaves his margin for error smaller. He's also a guy, though, that can see the order the second time through, and like he's just like, I'm just going to throw you sliders and curveballs. I'll mix in a changeup, and he'll just kill you with his secondaries. So I think there's still another step here in terms of maybe the fastball command coming all the way back from where it was pre-surgery. We know that's the last thing that sort of materializes itself. I think some of it too might be, he might need to work in a sinker, or, something that's a little bit different to get guys off the four-seamer consistently, or even to pitch to that contact and get ground balls, etc. I like a lot of what there is there with Painter. Like, all the ingredients are there. I think he really knows how to pitch. He's got advanced secondary stuff, just a couple tweaks to the fastball. And I think some of it, like I said, it wouldn't shock me if he got to the big leagues and all of a sudden it played differently than it did in AAA, just because those zones are tough. And, as we said, coming off an arm surgery, out for 2 years, the last thing to come back is the command. And the thing that's probably most accentuated in terms of struggles in AAA are command struggles because of how tight that zone is. So I think that might all be part of it. And, some of the pinpoint accuracy that he had before needs to come back. And, when you don't have a super deceptive arm action, that's one of those things you have to do, is you have to make sure that you're hitting in the right zones. He still has good enough stuff. There's still enough command there. There's still enough pitchability and like plus secondaries that I can't write it off, and, strange things have happened. We all wrote off Mick Abel, and now look at Mick Abel. It's looked really, really good this year.
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation at this time of year, compared to how we usually talk and think about players, right? Because so much of what we're doing with these rankings, the reports, the analysis is projecting the long run. And as you're describing Painter, of all the pitchers we've talked about today, it sounds like he has the least amount of glaring questions, but he's also the least outlier of any of the guys we've talked about, I think. Tong and Yesavage and Tolle all have this one really strange thing that I think, if you can catch lightning in a bottle right now, can benefit a playoff run. But obviously, based off where we have Painter ranked and kind of all of the ingredients, you feel really good about what that is in the long run. But it's an interesting. You drop him in right now, and when you say the fastball it gets obliterated, I'm like, that scares me a little bit in September going into October. But there is suddenly need to cover innings in Philadelphia. I also think, he's not the same type of ceiling. He's not ranked anywhere near Painter, but he is another top 100 prospect in the Phillies system. It's Justin Crawford. As I was thinking through guys who could potentially impact a Phillies playoff run, I kept coming back to Crawford, and I understand that he's a flawed player, right? Like it's a 60% ground ball rate. I think he chases out of the zone 30% of the time. Like there are warts there, and that's why he's ranked 85th and not 25th or 15th. Like there in the long run, we have some concerns, but he's the kind of player that excites me at this time of year just because of the bat to ball and the speed. And I look at the Phillies outfield mix right now. Nick Castellanos has a 578 OPS since July 1st. Harrison Bader hasn't slugged in August. Max Kepler, banished to the bench at this point. I think he's had a WRC plus above 100 once since 2021. This is, I think you can make a really good argument that of all the teams likely to make the playoffs, Phillies have the most pressure to get this thing done just based off how old their core is, how close they've come. That outfield mix leaves a lot to be desired. If you're looking for a guy that could potentially spark a run or even be an interesting option for you as a bat to ball speed guy, fourth outfielder off the bench, I'm not ready to close the book on Justin Crawford.
Yeah, and I think he does so many things well situationally that he's the kind of guy that can like make a lot of sense for a playoff team. If you're like, hey, this gives us some bench depth. He can defend 3 positions in the outfield. If we need a pinch runner that can steal a bag, and then go from, second to home on a single to the outfield, this is kind of your guy, right? Like he could be your Dave Roberts style, like type player, right? Not saying that, but I'm saying like that sort of role where he can be a pinch runner, at bat guy when you need it, someone that can put the ball in play in a certain situation, or fill in defensively, out there in the outfield in a big inning where you need to get some outs. So I think that he does kind of fit on a playoff roster. And there's no reason, I think, at this point, with the amount of experience he has in AAA, not to give him a September call up, see where it goes. Because, I look at somebody like Crawford and, I guess the big conversation would be like, hey, Geoff, he's not eligible to be added to the 40. Doesn't have to be added to the 40-man roster until after the 2026 season. He's already been in AAA now, for 475 plate appearances. He's got 105 games at AAA. He's going to be in the mix, on the big league roster in some way, shape, or form early next year. There's no reason not to just jump the gun now if he's going to be able to help you and sort of, make that a little bit deeper of a roster. And I think the other thing is with some of these young guys, like they're excited to be up, playing in big games, playing in the big leagues. Some of that spirit can be a little contagious as well. I know it's kind of not something that we can measure. It's like talking about heart or something like that, or some X grit, right? But no, I do think it is. Like I think there's some boost that you kind of get from adding some of these kids and bringing them into the playoff experience and welcoming them onto the team and in a deep playoff run. And I think you look at their bench options, like guys like Max Kepler, Weston Wilson. Like, do you necessarily want to carry those guys in a playoff roster, in particular Kepler? I don't know. I think I'd rather have Justin Crawford now, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. I also think on the range of conservative to aggressive GMs or teams that might factor in the control or the Rule 5, the Phillies are pretty low on that list. I think Dombrowski's demonstrated that he's willing to get aggressive when necessary. I think he could be a fun one. There is a human element to this. You mentioned like it's small sample size. It's October. Strange things happen. Like I think we need to look at September call-ups or prospects who could impact these races and think about guys who can spark in a small sample, even if the long-term outcome for certain guys might be very different. But I think Crawford he's my kind of player. Like I have a soft spot for players like Crawford anyways. So I'm watching that one. I think that would be a ton of fun.
I think that would be very, very exciting in particular. All right. We've gone We've got almost an hour here on potential September call-ups, or at least players we want to see in these playoff races that we think could make a difference and would be exciting for fans, right? At the end of the day, this is an entertainment product, Mark. You know, it's more than just actuaries and spreadsheets. There are fans in the stands watching on TV. You know, they want to be excited. That's why they watch baseball. I think sometimes people forget that. Let's get into some prospect soapboxes. We do this every week. We're going to break the rules. JJ's not here. He can't hold us to the rules. I thought it would be interesting if we talked about two players that are no longer prospect eligible. So technically, they're not top 100. Actually, excuse me. One of them is still prospect eligible. I forgot. Roki's still prospect eligible. I know, right? I forgot. That's fun. Keep it on the show. People like it. But Kristian Campbell was no longer prospect eligible. That's what I'm going to talk about. Mark's going to talk about Roki Sasaki. I'm going to go into Kristian Campbell first, if you don't mind. So Campbell, I think, is a guy that I would be shocked if he does not get a September call-up. Obviously, was up with the team early in the season, had a really, really good April. I think people kind of forget how good Campbell was initially out the gate. Like, he hit 301 in the first month of the season, and then everything just bottomed out in May. He ends up getting sent back down in June. And, you know, things have been somewhat uneven since he's been down in Worcester. That said, he has been very productive over the last month. You know, in terms of what the numbers look like, he's been hitting for some power. You know, he's been getting on base. He's been hitting for average. You know, the numbers overall, this is a 24 game sample, you know, exactly a month, going back to actually a little bit less, but going to the 27th of July. He's hit 315, 400, 522, 21.9% strikeout rate. You know, he's had 5 home runs over this month, driven in 21 runs. You know, he's been walking, not striking out like crazy. It looks like Kristian Campbell numbers of old, right? But the thing is, when I'm watching these games, there's a lot of mishits that go down the line for doubles. There's bad pitches, like low 90s fastballs. He hit a homer the other day at 105. It was off like an 88 mile per hour fastball from like Patrick Montverde. He's not hitting good pitching. So like, there's a lot of it I don't believe in. If you look at the underlying data, the EVs are down big. And even over this hot streak, the EVs haven't been that high. That was the thing that separated Campbell last season. Is it was the plate skills, it was the bat speed, you know, potential athleticism, though that doesn't seem to be functional a year later, just based on where he can fit defensively. Like, we're talking about this guy potentially playing first base now. There's something going on. And I assume it's probably the rib injury. Those things are weird. You know, your upper body and just how it can impact your swing, your ability to kind of explode. I don't know if it's maybe impacted some of his ability to work out. So, you know, he's not as strong as he was a year ago. I don't know that sort of thing. The team hasn't told us. If we have questions about it, it's like, no, he's feeling fine. But Mark, you looked at it. When you look at the EVs, I mean, I don't know the exact number. I'd have to go back and look. It's down like 4 or 5 miles per hour. Like, it is a substantial drop off in terms of like across the board too. It's like average EV 50 is down like that. EV 75 is down. EV 90 is down. So even like the averages and the high end, like, it's all sort of dropped. That is kind of concerning. And it makes me feel as if he'll come up, but I'm not so sure that he's out of the woods yet, Mark. And that's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, and Red Sox manager Alex Cora, I think it was just over a week ago, had a fairly lukewarm response on Campbell when he was asked about him by reporters. And it was essentially kind of what you just said. Like, we see the surface level production in AAA, but we also see that he isn't covering the zone the way we want him to. He isn't hitting certain types of fastballs, I think was the exact quote, the way that we want him to. To your point, it is a shocking drop in 90th percentile EV relative to last year. And I think like it's a fascinating, and I'm going to loop back around and ask for your thoughts on it, just because the trajectory over the course of the last 18 months is something unlike I can really remember in terms of how drastically he changed his profile. And I know there are folks out there who would criticize, like, hey, just a prospect, they get to the majors and it's different. But like the data that you cite at the 2024 underlying was impeccable. Like, it puts him in this conversation. Every single thing, from what scouts brought back to us to what you saw under the hood, pointed to a guy that could make an impact right away. They certainly felt it. Not only did they give him a contract, he was in the starting lineup. He was really good in April. I think that there is some merit to the rib injury that you brought, and also just kind of like the all of the athletic markers have kind of backed up. Like last year, we were talking about Kristian Campbell, like, maybe he's a little stretched at shortstop. You could put him in left field. He could play a really good second base. And now it's like, well, maybe he can play first base for you. And he's not hitting for a lot of power. It's, it's like, well, I don't know what to do with that kind of player. I think that when rosters expand, it doesn't hurt having another guy who can make some contact and maybe play a couple of positions if you need him down the stretch. But, he's not inspiring a lot of confidence here. And I talked a lot. I wanted to get back to kind of that question I posed halfway through. Like, what do you make of Campbell's rise? He was our fourth best prospect in the top 100. Like, as you sit back and think about kind of the ebbs and flows of his last 18 months, like, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think, the one thing that it like always comes back and rings in my head, because I was the big advocate for Kristian Campbell up this list. And, even the reporting I was doing with other teams, just having conversations, and like some of them were with like higher level decision makers in the front office, guys that are pushing buttons. And it was like, I know of at least one AL team that had Kristian Campbell as the number 2 player in their model behind Roman Anthony. So there was legitimate smoke like across the industry that this was a legitimate guy. I think that there were some scouts that were skeptical of the swing. The thing that's happened this year is he can't hit anything on the inside. And if you sort of look at where he really did his damage last year, and where his swinging strikes were, he did a lot of his damage, on the inner half of the plate. He's missing those fastballs now. That's not what we saw a year ago. He would miss more stuff on the outer half, etc., because he was short to the ball and really tried to turn on it really quick with like that kind of unusual explosive move, right? Like, but not one that you're necessarily used to seeing. But we're not seeing that now. And just even going back and looking at like last year's spray charts and, sort of looking at like his heat maps of where he was missing the ball, it's just year over year completely different, where there's been so many misses that are in the inner half. So many of his hardest hit drives were on the inner half. So like the very pitches that he was really successful against last year, he hasn't been successful against. Now, the thing that rings in my head was with JJ, and I kind of got off track there, but like he would always say in the meetings, the one thing that concerns me with Campbell is we don't have a ton of track record here. He only played a year in college, and then had this rocket ship ride. His first year as a professional, gets into the big leagues out of camp, and it took him some time to figure it out. So, I don't know what to make of it, because there's last year, there's also April. That's why it makes me think that rib injury had more to do with the struggles than we realize, and just kind of getting a very unusual swing just sort of out of sync. And sometimes with a small little thing out of sync with these kind of swings that aren't like your sort of natural, beautiful, adjustable swings. It's not that. It's more like a Cody Bellinger swing, right? And think about Bellinger. Bellinger's the same way. There's times where Bellinger's really, really locked in for a year or two. And then there's other times where Bellinger's swing is just a mess. And there's so much stuff mechanically he has to figure out. And, I think it's just they're both hypermobile guys. Obviously, Cody's from the left side of the plate and Kristian's from the right. But just guys that are kind of like hypermobile like that get into like these really unusual hitting positions usually can hit for a lot of power and can create a lot of bat speed. But there's also a lack of like stiffness and that kind of keeps you synced up right within your swing that always kind of works. Where like I think you compare and contrast like Bellinger with like a Bryce Harper. Harper like has that little bit extra bit of stiffness that kind of keeps him consistently in the same spots that he always is. Where I think Campbell and Bellinger kind of have similar issues. They're both guys that had injuries and then sort of had really bad struggles afterward as well. So, there's some other things kind of moving around here. I know I jumped into a bunch of different concepts on Campbell, but I think the biggest thing that my takeaway is probably be a little bit more skeptical of guys that don't have a ton of track record. It's not in my nature to be like that. Like I want to believe that players can get better and players can change and players can improve and add skills because we've seen it so many times. And I think that, it's one of the most beneficial thing that data provides is those opportunities for guys to get better. It was a great story. Maybe we all got caught up a little bit too much in the Kristian Campbell driveline bat speed narrative that we wanted to buy into of him improving and well, it come to fruition. I'm not quite sure, but I don't want to write it off yet. And I want to revisit this in a year and see where it is.
Well, speaking of getting caught up in narratives or revisiting process or guys who are going through mechanical changes right now in AAA, I'd like to take a minute to just touch on Roki Sasaki because we have talked for 70 minutes on prospects who could potentially impact September and October. And Roki Sasaki's name was not brought up in the meat of the podcast here because I think that we both share a lot of skepticism that the present version of Roki Sasaki can impact. Forget a postseason run, could even make an impact in September, let alone October. He actually pitched tonight. So we're going to do a little live podcasting, live radio here on the fly. He went 3 2/3. He threw 75 pitches, gave up 5 hits, 3 runs, looks like 8 hard hit balls, if I'm counting that on the fly here correctly. He threw basically 2 pitches. His fastball averaged 96.4 miles per hour. He threw his splitter nearly as much as his fastball, worked in 6 sliders. This is Roki Sasaki's 3rd rehab start. I don't know that I feel any better after the 3rd one that this is someone who is taking the necessary steps to get back to Los Angeles today. And as I know, they're obviously hitter, pitcher, very different players, but they are Roki and Kristian Campbell to me have been intertwined in my head all year as guys who were in our top 5 where it's like, what the heck happened? And what the heck do you make of this? And even like you mentioned, Kristian Campbell didn't really have a track record, but Roki did. He pitched in the WBC. He the data that came over from Japan and the visual evaluations of what he was able to do in Japan was electric, and that's just not what we're seeing right now. The stuff has backed up. The swing and miss is not there. I think he's maybe 38th, 39th, 40th right now on our top 100. I think that we're going to have a really interesting, difficult conversation about what exactly to do with him in the offseason and maybe just how far down the list you're willing to go. If we can come full circle at the beginning, we talked about how pitchers can change so quickly. And I'm not ready to just, forget about all the reasons that Roki got to where he was entering the season, but this is not that guy. It's not getting better. Geoff, where are you presently on Roki Sasaki?
Oof. I'll say if this, if we just did blind taste test on this guy, I would be like, oh, this is like a low leverage reliever. Like, it's a guy with velocity, not a lot of feel for spin, not great fastball shape. It's like average, it's like 15 inches of induced vertical break, 11 inches of arm side run. Not a high rate of spin on it either. So adding some more ride might be difficult. And it's a really good splitter. I've never been off on the splitter. I still think that is a plus pitch. The big question to me is like the inconsistency in the data we saw in Japan, but even like the stuff we saw in the WBC, because that was on Hawkeye. Like I wrote an article. I don't think you had been come back yet, but I wrote an article from that WBC. Sort of covering Roki Sasaki. I saw him before he ever came stateside and was pretty excited. And thought after seeing him and Yamamoto in the same mound in the same game, thinking like, I think it's probably Sasaki that's, the better of the two. It's remarkable. I don't know where to go with this guy, because my head tells me to just take him off the top 100 entirely. Sort of some behind the curtain here with Oz, but this is a guy that, we always have players like this. I think everybody on staff just wants him to graduate so he's no longer our prospect ranking headache. It's tough though, because he's probably not going to graduate. He's going to be prospect eligible, at least for us, for another year. And he's in a loaded system. So he's also one of those difficult guys where if you're out in the profile and you don't believe it, like I kind of don't. There's a lot of guys that could be ranked behind him that we all think are better prospects that then are sort of landlocked into a list.
Well, we've talked about a handful of them. Like you start playing the game of like, who would you take him over, right? And Nolan McLean is pitching in the majors right now. I believe maybe an hour ago, someone on this podcast said he might be the number one starter in a playoff series.
Yeah.
Like
I take him over right now.
Payton Tolle is right behind at 40th. Robbie Snelling, Jonah Tong. You keep going down the list here. Like Yesavage is 56th. Gage jumping Jamie Arnold. Like, like you keep going and going and going down the top 100. And, I think for me, he's like the perfect guy to have 100th, or to have it at the back, just because I think in some ways, if you were, if someone got hurt, you might do that with, do you treat him like an injury guy and just wait to see what happens come March, and maybe it suddenly everything takes back up and he's the pitcher closer to the pitcher we thought he would be. But truly between those two guys in the last year of prospect cycle, it's two incredibly confounding prospects. And I think we as a staff, we as an industry, like there's a lot to dive into there as to like, what were they? How did we get here? Like, what do you take away? You don't want to overreact, but they're fascinating to me.
Yeah. I think the thing that we have to keep in mind with Roki, of course, is that he is, so incredibly young, and he knew that developing his arsenal and improving his arsenal was really, really important to his success and viability. Maybe we didn't read enough into that, because that was something when I was at that press conference at the winter meetings, with his agent, and he stood up there and, talked through all the things that were important. That was something that he really made a point of. And, I think kind of looking at some of the teams that he looked at, and then going with the Dodgers probably made a lot of sense for that reason. They haven't been able to get him right yet. I think there's, always some knocks and some jokes that get made about Dodgers pitching prospects always getting hurt, but they do optimize guys, and they usually get them to the best place that they can possibly be, which I think almost adds to the concern, because it's like they've had some time now and we're still not seeing any drastic improvements. There's power here. Is there just not enough feel for spin and all those other characteristics that this style of pitcher can't really play over here, but could be successful over there, where splitters are the name of the game and, it's a lot of contact hitters, etc. I don't know. But so far it hasn't been great. And it was almost from the jump with Roki. There really haven't been any positive times, because at least with Campbell, there were some positive times, right? So
we'll always have April.
We'll always have April. Maybe we'll get another one. We'll see. Maybe we'll get September, right? All right, guys. We've got an hour and 15 minutes. We've given you tons of information on at least names that we want to see get called up and potential fun playoff scenarios. For Geoff, for Mark, for JJ, I want to thank you guys for subscribing to Baseball America, and for everybody out there listening for tuning in. See you next week.